And out of that brush fire alert in Collier County, massive wildfire continuing to burn in Big Cypress Preserve, leading to all that smoke you see right there on Alligator Alley. Those dry conditions continue across the state.
In southern Florida, fire is not unusual. For thousands of years, flames have quietly passed through the wetlands of the Everglades, clearing dead vegetation, recycling nutrients, and allowing new life to grow. In fact, many plants here evolved specifically to survive fire. Some grasses actually depend on it. Under normal conditions, these fires move slowly and predictably. They burn low to the ground, they consume dry brush and grasses, and then they fade away. But recently, something very different began to unfold in one of Florida's most remote landscapes. Deep inside the protected wilderness of Big Cypress National Preserve, multiple fires ignited across the dry wetlands. At first, they looked routine. Small brush fires scattered across the preserve, the kind firefighters deal with every year. But within days, those separate fires began merging. The flames spread across miles of dry grassland, weaving through cypress forests and sawgrass prairies. Smoke columns began rising above the wetlands, visible from miles away. Soon, the fires were no longer isolated incidents. They had combined into a single, expanding wildfire complex. Officials would eventually call it the Big Cypress Fire Complex, one of the largest wildfires Florida has experienced in years. And unlike the towering infernos people associate with western states like California, this fire behaved in a very different way. It did not erupt into massive walls of flame. It moved quietly, it spread slowly, and in many places it burned where firefighters could not even see it. Because in Big Cypress, fire does not always stay above ground, a landscape that can burn even when it looks like water. To understand why this wildfire became so difficult to control, you first have to understand the landscape where it started. Big Cypress is not a traditional forest. It is a massive wetland ecosystem, a mosaic of cypress swamps, prairies, pine islands, and shallow seasonal water flows that stretch across more than 700,000 acres of southern Florida. During the rainy season, much of this land is covered by shallow water. But during dry months, something remarkable happens. The water slowly disappears. Wet soil becomes dry peat. Grasses and vegetation that normally stay damped become highly flammable. And when fire enters that environment, it behaves in ways that are very different from fires in mountainous forests. Instead of racing uphill through trees, fires in Big Cypress move through enormous horizontal fuel beds, miles of grasses, shrubs, and palmetto plants stretching across flat terrain. That means the flames may not move extremely fast, but they can move extremely far. And once they spread across a large enough area, containing them becomes a complex logistical challenge. But even that is only part of the story, because some of the most persistent fire activity in Big Cypress does not happen above ground at all. It happens beneath the soil, the hidden fire beneath the wetlands. Many areas of the Everglades in Big Cypress contain peat soil, thick layers of partially decomposed plant material that have accumulated over centuries. When these peat layers dry out during extended drought conditions, they can ignite. And when peat catches fire, it behaves very differently from surface flames. Instead of producing large, visible fires, peat burns slowly. It smolders underground, sometimes for weeks, sometimes even for months. And as it burns, it can travel beneath the soil, re-emerging hundreds of feet away from where firefighters thought the flames had already been extinguished. This phenomenon turns a wildfire into something much harder to predict. A fire can appear contained on the surface, only to reappear somewhere completely unexpected. For firefighters battling the Big Cypress Fire Complex, that underground fire behavior created a major challenge. Even when aerial water drops cooled surface flames, hidden embers beneath the soil could continue moving silently through the peat layers. In some places, smoke would suddenly begin rising from the ground itself, a sign that fire was still active below. Smoke that traveled across South Florida. As the fire complex expanded, smoke from the wetlands began drifting across large areas of southern Florida. Under certain wind conditions, thick smoke plumes traveled across highways and nearby communities. One of the most affected transportation routes was Alligator Alley, the remote highway that cuts directly through the Everglades along Interstate 75 between Miami and Naples. Drivers traveling through the region sometimes encountered sudden walls of smoke that dramatically reduced visibility. Clear skies could shift to near-zero visibility in minutes. Authorities issued travel warnings, and in some cases, traffic slowed dramatically as drivers navigated through drifting smoke clouds. While the fire itself was burning deep inside protected wetlands, the smoke made its presence felt across much larger areas. And that raised another concern: weather. The three ingredients that control every wildfire. Every wildfire depends on three fundamental ingredients: fuel, heat, and wind. Remove any one of these elements and the fire weakens. But when all three are present, fires can expand quickly. During the weeks when the Big Cypress Fire Complex developed, southern Florida experienced conditions that made wildfire spread easier than usual. Dry weather lowered water levels across the wetlands. Vegetation that would normally remain damp began drying out, and shifting winds periodically pushed the fire into new areas of brush and grassland. Each time the flames entered fresh fuel, the fire perimeter expanded. But unlike fires in mountainous regions, the challenge here was not steep terrain or towering trees, it was scale. Big Cypress is enormous, and when fires spread across landscapes measured in hundreds of thousands of acres, containing them becomes less about extinguishing flames and more about managing where they move. The massive effort to contain the fire. Multiple agencies joined the effort to control the Big Cypress Fire Complex. Teams from the Florida Forest Service worked alongside crews from the National Park Service to slow the spread of the fire. Helicopters and air tankers dropped water across active fire fronts. Ground crews used bulldozers to carve containment lines through vegetation. Firefighters monitored hotspots across vast areas of wilderness. The goal was not necessarily to eliminate the fire entirely, which is often impossible in remote wetlands, but to guide it, contain it, and prevent it from threatening nearby infrastructure or communities. Because Big Cypress is more than just empty wilderness, it is home to some of the most fragile wildlife populations in North America. The wildlife living inside the fire zone. The preserve provides habitat for dozens of protected species. Among them is one of the rarest large predators in the United States, the endangered Florida panther. Fewer than a few hundred of these animals remain in the wild. Big Cypress also supports populations of black bears, alligators, white-tailed deer, and hundreds of bird species that depend on the delicate balance of the Everglades ecosystem. Interestingly, fire itself is not always destructive in these habitats. Many plant species here evolved specifically to survive periodic fires. Some even rely on fire to trigger seed germination or clear outgrowth. In many cases, controlled fire actually improves habitat for wildlife. But large, uncontrolled fires introduce uncertainty, especially when they burn under unusually dry conditions. That is why fire managers monitor these events so closely, because what concerns scientists is not just the fire itself, it is the changing environmental conditions surrounding it. Why scientists are paying close attention. In recent years, researchers studying the Everglades have noticed subtle but important shifts in seasonal patterns. Longer dry periods, higher average temperatures, and changing rainfall cycles. These changes can leave wetlands exposed and dry for longer periods of time than they historically were, and that increases the probability that fires grow larger than usual. Events like the Big Cypress Fire Complex do not necessarily indicate a new normal on their own, but they provide scientists with valuable data about how fire behaves in wetlands ecosystems under evolving climate conditions. In other words, every wildfire like this becomes a real-world experiment, one that researchers analyze carefully because understanding these fires today helps predict how ecosystems may behave decades from now. What happens next? Eventually, seasonal rains will return to southern Florida. Water levels across the wetlands will rise again, and many of the areas scorched by the fire will slowly recover. From the air, the blackened landscape will gradually turn green again as grasses and vegetation regrow. In fact, in many parts of the Everglades, fire actually accelerates ecological renewal. But the Big Cypress Fire Complex serves as an important reminder of something many people misunderstand about Florida's environment. The state is famous for its water, its swamps, its wetlands. But under the right conditions, even landscapes that appear permanently wet can become vulnerable to fire. And when wetlands burn, the fire behaves in ways that look very different from the dramatic infernos people expect. It spreads slowly, it moves quietly, and sometimes it burns underground long after the visible flames are gone. The Big Cypress Fire Complex may not be the largest wildfire in American history, but it is one of the clearest reminders that nature rarely behaves according to our assumptions. Even in a place defined by water, fire can still take hold, and when it does, it can reshape the landscape in ways that few people ever see.